Okay. Hello. Sorry for the late jump in. I'm here today in not a cruiser on the Captain Rework badge. Would you look at that? Well, I say not a cruiser, but this actually is a cruiser. But we'll get onto that later. Anyhow, we're in the tier 9 European destroyer, the Friesland. This is the one that predates the release of the line and is a modernized AA and anti-submarine warfare destroyer with fairly formidable AA, as you can see me opening up on this Implacable. Now we're on the map Sleeping Giant. Mode is Domination, and we're in 7-8-9 matchmaking, so we are fortunate enough to be top tier shells coming in inbound because I turned my AA on to contest that carrier, by the way. There's an Alaska in this game, but otherwise not too much other radar. Unfortunately, he is at the cap that we're heading toward. Now the Friesland is a tier 9 premium available for 1 million free experience. For a tier 9 destroyer, she has a fairly light hit point pool, 20,000 with survivability expert, so just about the same amount as a Fletcher or Black. She does a middling 37.5 knots, but does not have access to speed boost, so for the most part will be slower and more sluggish than the vast majority of destroyers. She's also quite a large ship. I don't know if it's very easy to tell here as I beach against the side of the rock with my rather thick destroyer, but she's definitely a bit of a chunky ship. Now she only has 2 turrets. They are twins, twin 120 mils. But they do have an astoundingly high rate of fire. With my current build, 1.5 seconds per salvo. Now in past patches, it would have been shorter. You would have been able to get 1.3-ish. Gonna turn my guns onto this calibre. You can see they're extremely responsive, but 1.5 is nevertheless an extremely formidable reload number. Now the shells themselves, as you can see, have quite a bit of arc. Even at just about 8 kilometers to Escagero, I have to give quite a bit of substantial lead, taking a while to home in. However, the rather low shell velocity does give me some nice impressive arcs, which allows me to rain fire on this Alaska in this present position. Torpedo bombers are coming in, so I'm going to get spotted very briefly, but I don't really care, not too threatened by most of the ships from this position. Now the Friesland has a 6-kilometer AA aura and formidable post-war AA. I'm gonna adjust my aim a little bit and pop my defensive fire. Now with defensive fire active, the Friesland is about as formidable as a Cleveland class cruiser in terms of AA, but because she has that short air spot radius due to being a destroyer, she is extremely formidable against enemy carrier aircraft, especially lower tier ships. As well, I'm spitting out all these HE shells, but you can see quite a few shatters on the Alaska, 15 shatters to my 38 pens. That I do eventually score a fire. Now each individual shell doesn't hit that hard, especially in this bow in Alaska situation, but I am going to keep him lit with full fire build with fire flags and the fire skill, which I don't currently have yet, and I may or may not take, probably won't end up taking. She does end up having 6 to 8% fire chance, which is quite a high number for a destroyer with 1.5 second reload with 2 gun turrets on 1.5 second reload. Now the twins are 360-degree turrets on both the front and back. So if you see me swing these turrets through here, I'm going to just swing myself into the cap. It's very easy for me to swing the turrets through because both are 360s. Even the front turret, I believe, can swing through the bow to go to the other side, as you can see. Okay, now I did that because I wasn't anticipating getting jumped. Now, in addition to having withering firepower, even though each shell only hits for 1750 HE alpha, you do spit out a lot of them. She has a fairly short stock range, 12.3, but because of those high arcing shells, I prefer to keep the range short anyhow. The only radar in the game has died, by the way, so I'm now relatively safe to take this cap. She does have a fairly formidable consumable set. Earlier you saw me pop my defensive fire, but I also have access to a hydroacoustic. This is very similar to the hydroacoustic found on the Z46, the Tech Tree German destroyer. It's a 5-kilometer hydro. a full-on cruiser hydro with 3.5 kilometer torpedo detection and 5 kilometer ship detection. Do easily score a fire there on that shores. Get a bit reset because I was being a bit cocky, but as you saw when I fired on that shores and had to accelerate, not the fastest moving ship. Oh, need to be careful here. Now I have 4 smoke charges, so I could just use them. It's a little greedy, admittedly, not smoking, but kind of reluctant to smoke until I can get into range of that Minnesota, potentially. The only real threat to me here now on this flank is the Bismarck. I have that hydro. Now, last but not least, the Friesland does have access to a smokescreen consumable. Gonna open up and finish off this shores. Oh, there's a Udachi there. Gonna smoke up and pop my hydro as well. Now this smoke is an American smoke, so as you can see, has a almost 30-second action time. Picking up those Udachi torps on my hydro and shredding him to pieces inside of my hydroacoustic ship spotting range. He's inside my hydro range now, so he's gonna have to leave. No longer have line of fire, but I'm gonna dissuade this Bismarck. So a nice long 30-second smoke deployment time. Forgot to turn my AA on there. And more importantly, I have that American smoke time, so as you can see I have almost 2 minutes on this left still. More planes coming in for me to chew up. And my AA engages at 6 kilometers, just gonna pop my defensive fire here. Not a fan of rockets. Udachi coming up, inside my hydro once more. And the defensive fire manages to chew through quite quickly. Did manage to score fire onto that Minnesota, and my hydro is picking up all of this Udachi's torpedoes, so he's not going to be having too much fun. That 360-degree turret rotation allowing me to easily switch sides and start raining fire onto this Minnesota. Now remember, I mentioned that Bismarck is the real threat. He's about to take some torps, however, so we'll see if he survives. He does die. Minnesota turning away. You can see me playing inside of my rather short 12.3 kilometer range. I'm ignoring that Udachi, but that's mainly because I didn't have shots. But I'm gonna just reverse out. You can see that high fire chance and high rate of fire, allowing me to set multiple fires over the course of the game. Arcing shells mean that even at fairly pedestrian distances, it becomes a little bit difficult, and you can see my lead increasing rather substantially. You set a permanent fire. Scratch that Udachi frag. My AA clipping, and the Minnesota is now dead. My hydro is now down, so I do have to play a bit carefully. I just trim this fighter and hope that there's no torps in this window. Turn my AA back off. Now with my AA off, my air detectability is actually a fairly respectable 2.3 kilometers, you will note, even though I have 6 kilometer AA range, and I have a formidable Cleveland-class cruiser type AA suite, which is more than enough to destroy squadrons, especially when they get caught out at maybe only 3 or 4 kilometers away. The long range extends quite deep, and the mid-range is a formidable continuous DPS aura. Only using really the HE in this match, but the AP is actually extremely powerful if you can get a broadside 2100 alpha. Doesn't seem like that much, but remember, you have that 1.5 second reload. You can see me coming through almost untouched. Now, the large Friesland is a rather sluggish vessel. As I move across, I'm going to contest a Tashkent in the distance. And as you saw, she kind of does struggle at longer ranges, so she is extremely potent at killing destroyers that aren't fighting back like those Japanese destroyers I stumbled into. However, versus dedicated gunboats like the Tashkent, for example, or a calibre, Marceau, that kind of thing, ships with superior ballistics, a Grozavoy maybe even, if they open up the range, the Friesland will find herself at a disadvantage. The French destroyers have the advantage of having that damage saturation. The Russians will typically have a heal, and you are sitting on a relatively squishy 20,000 HP hull. with only high rate of fire to protect you. Now at close ranges, obviously, you're going to win most of your duels, especially if you can use that smoke hydro combo that the Germans used to be kind of famous for. Not going to get too much more damage out of this match, I anticipate. There's a Kagero somewhere up here, stalking. I don't run RPF. In the past, I had run RPF on my Friesland captain, but in this particular iteration, I've selected not to in this captain rework state. Okay, I don't know why he was recalling there. It's nothing to benefit from. Turn my AA back off. As you can see, the 360 turrets and the high rate of fire make you a formidable gunfire boat. Now with the Friesland, as you saw me occupy that mid position there, is relatively static. And so she does want to be fairly greedy with her smoke screens. Now, they do last a very long time, as I mentioned, but because they're American, they also have an extremely long cooldown in between, which means once you deploy the smoke, you really want to get the full use out of it, because you're not going to see that smoke again for an extended period of time. Don't see any Kagero torps on the map. Well, I'd rather chase a Kagero than chase a Tashkent. We've secured every cap, so I'm going to swing down inward. This game is over, though. So as a result, you end up being fairly static. This, combined with the fact that you don't have a speed boost and your large sluggish size and relatively low HP, makes the Friesland play much more akin to a small radar cruiser or small island camping cruiser than a more traditional destroyer. This, as well, of course, as you might have noticed, lacks torpedoes, unlike the other pan-European destroyers, which have those formidable, rapidly traveling torpedoes. The Friesland doesn't have any at all, which means you are vulnerable to battleships pushing you, which is why I was focusing down that Bismarck earlier in the match. You are, in essence, a very light cruiser without any self-defense armament. Think Colbert, but with a smokescreen and a powerful defensive fire. Now, the fact that you don't have a citadel does make you a little less vulnerable than you would otherwise be, but overall you do have to remember that this is a cruiser when you play it. You want to play it like a cruiser, which is something I find that many players struggle with because she is under the destroyer branch, so they're unused to a destroyer that plays rather like a cruiser. For a cruiser player like myself, however, that does mean that once I've adjusted my playstyle to understand that the Friesland is basically to be played like a cruiser. I'm flag stacked, by the way, so you can not pay attention to that. She is quite formidable, a very powerful static control unit because of that hydro smoke combination. Ideally suited for locking down a location and traveling short distances in between. So on the defensive, the Friesland is extremely powerful. On the offensive, she can be decently useful as well, but definitely a ship that favors being on the defense with her kit overall. You can see pretty even 1-to-2 ratio of HE shell to fire damage over there. And a decent number of planes shot down. Now, before we continue on with the second game in this kind of Friesland showcase, I'm going to show off my current captain. I have a 19-point captain, haven't quite managed to push my Friesland captain to 21 points yet, but it's a fairly pedestrian build, as you might imagine for a ship like the Friesland. She doesn't have any torpedoes, so she doesn't need to take any of the torpedo skills, so the skill choice is fairly easy. So your standard captain build of preventive maintenance, last stand, survivability expert, concealment expert, that hasn't changed. Then, because of the way the three-pointer skills work now, you can go for either superintendent or adrenaline rush. I tend to go for adrenaline rush first, even though it's been nerfed from 2 points to 3 points. It still has the exact same benefits and is still a fairly powerful offensive skill. We go for Adrenaline Rush instead of BFT, or the new BFT, which is Main Battery and A Specialist these days, because it now only gives 5% to your main battery reload instead of the 10% it used to give. It also gives 10% continuous AA damage, which in the case of Friesland is actually good. This new BFT, even though it used to be pretty much a universal skill on any gunboat destroyer, I actually don't take it on a lot of the gunboat destroyers, even something like Kitakazi, for example, because the 5% benefit is just not that great. I actually preferentially will take Superintendent in a lot of cases. Now, in the case of something like Kitakaze, this is because the Kitakaze needs to take IFHE, but with 120mm rifles and only normal 1/6 HE penetration, the Friesland doesn't benefit from IFHE at all. You're just nerfing your fire chance, so there's no reason to take that. So Adrenaline Rush and then Superintendent, and then I follow up with, lastly, my 5% bonus to damage and 10% bonus to AA. You can see here continuous damage 361. Which is quite similar to a Cleveland class cruiser. Now you're going to look at the number and say it's a little bit lower, but do keep in mind the Cleveland does have better matchmaking. But very similar to the Cleveland, 323. Now the auras are different. Cleveland's mostly medium range, 239, that kind of thing. Whereas the Friesland is actually a nice long 6-kilometer AA aura, 361, that can be boosted by defensive fire. And she produces a fair number of flags, 6 with my current build. 35% sector reinforcement. And you can see here the AA is distributed quite nicely, with 170 in the long range and 328 in the medium range. And the medium range extends out to 3.5 kilometers, fairly respectable. Now with my last 2 points to round out this 19-point build, I'm actually going to go for Consumable Enhancements Expert. This will extend the duration of your hydroacoustic, keep you safe inside your smoke. The hydro obviously has offensive applications as well, and it'll also benefit your smoke generator. Now remember, that's smoke generator action time. So this means that it's extending how long your smoke is deploying. So it's going to go from that 30-ish seconds to about 33. Since we're in port, we can look at the exact number. So the deployment time will go from 34.5 to just about 37, 38 seconds. And you can see that long duration American smoke, definitely very useful to have it trailing. Module-wise, very straightforward. Main batteries to keep your 2 guns online. You only have 2 guns. If you lose a single gun, it's actually a disaster, which is why both preventative maintenance and main battery armaments modification 1 is extremely important. If you can access it, hydroacoustic search modification 1 is the most optimal module for your slot 2. It gives you 20% action time to your hydro time, which pushes it up to 132 seconds. If you don't have that, engine room protection is very standard. Slot 3, you can mount a lot of things. Now, if you want to meme even harder, you can put the smoke generator module. I don't recommend it though, because as you can see, it cuts down your actual smoke screen dispersion time by 5%, and that's the 127 seconds you see there. So that's how long a smoke puff takes to dissipate once you set it up, and that ends up shaving off, I believe, about 7 or 8 seconds. So in exchange, you get 30% to the action time, so 30% to 34.3 will add. In this case, because it's an American smoke, about the same amount of time, so it's a bit of a trade-off, but in the end it doesn't really do anything. You have the same net smoke time, it's just distributed differently, so not really an optimal module. So I'm taking AA mod just to get faster sectoring to make use of my formidable AA. This very standard module is aiming systems, however, because getting slightly better accuracy on those twin turrets is nice. It doesn't need turret reverse, so choose between aiming and AA. Most people don't spec into AA that much anymore, but I am of the opinion that it's still pretty fine, so I choose to spec into it. Slot 4 is a no-brainer. You take engine propulsion. The Friesland is a thunder chunker and has no access to speed boost at all, and you're going to be stopped a lot in your smoke. You have your hydro to keep you safe, but a lot of times there's going to be stuff like radars and other such things that are going to force you to move from your smoke, so at that time propulsion modification 1 is very useful. Slot 5, concealment systems. Now, I didn't end up contesting too many destroyers, but you will note that the Friesland has a rather large 6.4 kilometer detection radius with both concealment expert on the captain and module, so you're not going to be beating most ships. You have a 5 km hydro and a 6.4 kilometer detection, so you are still going to be spotted well before you're in engagement range with your hydro for the vast majority of ships. You do want to keep your concealment down, however. Some people will not take concealment expert on their captain and take only the module here and choose to spec into gun skills like AFT and maybe even Fearless Brawler. That's a completely different style of play for the Friesland, but I like to play in a kind of more controlled, holding down a zone style, so I want to minimize my detection. It's still not going to beat anything, but it gives me more of a margin of error to move around. As well, it also keeps your air detectability down and allows you to ambush carrier aircraft more effectively. The Friesland and Holland and the likes of those pan-European AA destroyers are really only able to leverage their formidable AA trap ability because of that low air spotting, and concealment definitely contributes towards that. And last but not least, I'm taking a reload module. It does nerf your turret traverse, but as you saw, the turret traverse is quite snappy. You really don't end up feeling it, and it's just a 12% damage bonus. Now, you could also go AA if you really want. It'll make your defensive fire extremely powerful, push it up to 8 flax, and push your continuous up into the 400s. However, as you can see, most of the time you will be engaging surface ships, and versus tier 8 aircraft, which you can already shred, it's not going to really shred them any faster. And versus tier 10 aircraft, which you're only moderately effective against, don't make the mistake of leaving your AA on. By the way, versus tier 10 ships, you definitely want to use your AA as more of an AA trap. If you saw me in that last game there, you want to wait till people are inside of that 6 kilometer AA range and then pop your AA. You don't want to leave it on at maximum range and engage them all the time, because then they're going to spend minimal time inside your AA aura and they're going to light you up at inopportune times. People who play Holland and Friesland sometimes make the mistake of thinking that because these two destroyers have extremely formidable AA numbers, 394 on this Holland, 390, 361 on this Friesland, that you have enough AA to actually intimidate the carrier by dinking a couple of their planes. But really, all you're doing is spawning yourself, and a determined carrier player is going to strike you, and in the Friesland, you don't even have a heal, unlike the Holland, so you're just going to be taking away from that very small hit point pool for free. Only 20,000 hit points with Survivability Expert, and you have no armor. So, don't be leaving your AA on. So that's pretty much it for captain skills and modules. A very standard build. Just to reiterate, standard captain or standard destroyer build: PM, L last stand, survivability expert, concealment, and then I like superintendent and then adrenaline rush into BFT, and then last but not least, I'm going to take consumables enhancement. Now, if you don't want to take this enhanced consumables, you can take other priority target, although I think it's a little unnecessary. I used to take it when it was a 1-pointer, but that was the old captain system, so we'll just leave that out. But you could take your pyrotechnician. It's only 1% fire chance these days, but the Friesland does fire incredibly fast, so it's not nothing. Now, alternatively, you could sacrifice the BFT, which really is giving only a very marginal reload boost, and you would be having 3 points right now, so 5 points left over, and go for AFT and then a 1-pointer, probably consumables specialist up here, just to get cooldown on your defensive fire. In this case, there's not too much else to take. I guess you could take not gun feeder, but incoming fire alert. But I find that with the kind of slow ballistics of the Friesland, I just don't get too much mileage out of the AFT. Anyhow, we're gonna hop back into the matchmaker and see what we find in the queue. So as I said, Friesland very static in her gameplay. She's a very defensive ship in ideal circumstances. If you need to push with her, you can. She does have that offensive hydro, but remember that big gap between her detection range and her actual hydro does mean it's not a very good consumable to be pushing with unless you absolutely have to. Again, we're top tier. I do have to take note that this one has 3 radars, no carrier, which is going to happen actually quite a bit because she's in the tier 9 matchmaking bracket. So this is also why I prefer not to spec too much into AA. I do love doing it in ships like the Worcester, in the Cleveland even, but not for this particular ship. You're going to see a lot of no carrier games, so you really want to emphasize your guns. You don't have any torpedoes to fall back on, so you really need to have your guns be as powerful as possible. Spawning on North Domination, couple of battleships, Alaska, Cleveland, Belfast Shores, and then Fletcher, Kagero, Akatsuki. So of these, the Fletcher has 5.8 concealment, Kagero 5.4, Akatsuki 6.4. So I matched the Akatsuki and I'm beaten by the other two. So I'm going to have to be a little creative in order to secure the cap. So I'm going to head toward my A cap, no sense in abandoning it. Now a lot of destroyers like to go out onto this flank here. I personally don't like to play that way, and the Friesland, remember, is not a destroyer at all, so you should definitely be heading for the safety of island cover. I anticipate that unless they push A cap very strongly, we're not going to be seeing as much of a high damage value in this particular game. You can see only 3 ships actually spawned on my flank. My Udachi is coming over for some reason, but maybe he can help me out and take the cap. His concealment's also pretty bad, but still better than mine. So unless there's a lot of ships pushing in, we're probably not going to deal too much damage. This guy wants to spot for me. I mean, he's only marginally better. There is that FDG. So in a cap situation like this, I haven't spotted any of the radars yet until now. There's the Alaska at a fair distance pushing on the flank, so he's not going to be a threat for a significant period of time. So in this kind of situation, I am going to reverse myself in. There's a high chance that there's going to be torps dumped into the water, that kind of thing, and rather than reverse away from torps, which can be quite tricky, I want to be pushing in. This pink Miyoko is probably going to die very, very quickly. This bottom tier, no heal Japanese cruiser who's broadsiding 3 battleships in Alaska. There's also a Belfast pushing this cap, which is, you know, not ideal. So he's spotted right now, so I'm going to try and dissuade him. I'm going to try and dissuade a lot of things, actually. He has an 8.5 radar, and there's a Fletcher caught in my hydro. I'm inside Belfast radar range, but I'm not in the firing range of too many enemy ships. That's why I'm okay to not do very much. Now I am caught inside the Belfast radar. Already pushing forward. I'm clearing. The only thing that can really shoot me are those ships on the side with the Alaska, so the FDG and Alaska. He's going to get some shots into me, and I'm not going to heal. But remember, just have to maintain angle. We have to survive this Belfast radar, which thankfully is fairly short. He's still pushing in. And I was more focused on my survival there than my actual shooting, so my shooting suffered a little bit there. I'm going to continue to blind fire, however. Some of my shells found home. I'm going to reverse back into the cap now. Do need to keep an eye on the Alaska. There's that Fletcher who foolishly stayed in for some reason. You can see the shells are a little wonky sometimes. And now, with the Belfast radar expended, oh, there's a fucking Belfast in my cap. Now he has a 4-kilometer hydro, I believe, as a tier 7. Need to avoid those Fletcher torpedoes first, though. Oh, I fired a bit too much. Should have ceased fire as I was in my smoke. I'm actually going to have to let him go. So a bit of a mistake on my part. Need to control your distance. But with this many ships, we're definitely falling back. So in this situation, remember, I'm a very defensive light cruiser, basically, of only 20,000 HP. In this situation, with the Alaska pushing in, I have a fair force, but they're not anywhere close to any position to be able to help me out. I'm going to fall back from this cap. So this is a situation where, even though there's a nice situation where they're kind of pushing in, we definitely don't have the firepower to take it. So we're going to follow it back, let the Belfast and Alaska take that cap. I maybe could have held on to it for a little longer if I stayed in my smoke, but definitely still risky with the Alaska pushing. So I'm going to pull away. There's just no sense in throwing my hull into that kind of danger. The enemy team's going to take a cap, so I'm just going to respond by taking B. We did clear out a Fletcher, but it looks like outside of that Miyoko that suicided, I also lost a Benson and a Drake. My Benson apparently YOLO rushed a Sinop in North Carolina, which did not end very well for him. My consumables are coming back up now, so I'm gonna have my smoke screen at the very least. But for now, we're gonna redeploy to B and do what we can over here. Continue to lose ships on the other side, so this game is looking a bit grim already. There's that Minnesota, and obviously not gonna fire on him. No, 40-second reload, he appears to be alone too. So I actually can fire because he's gonna pass behind that rock. You can see at pretty much my max range, not gonna do very much. And I'm unspotted because he's pretty much the only ship here. And that is why I risked firing. Yes, I gave away my position, but he was gonna know I'm here anyway, or he would know at least that something is here when I touch this cap. He's looking at me, but what can he do, right? Not gonna go too far. I actually want those ships that are over at A cap to push in. I will pursue this Minnesota, make his life a little difficult. If he fires again, I might fire again and pass through this channel, see if I can do something at C cap. The Udachi, even though it has really terrible 15-kilometer torpedoes, can actually hold them at bay for a significant period of time. I think I'm the only one spotting him is the problem. If I smoke here, my Odin will have a hard time spotting for me. Okay, you know what? I need to deal some damage, so I'm just gonna blind fire him. He might blind fire me, but it's only 2 guns, really. He was reversing, so. Need the Udachi to maybe spot him, thank you. Or he can fire. That works as well. You'll note the enemy team is taking C-cap, unfortunately. There's that fire from the formidable fire rate. I don't think we're going to be winning this one, but... Oh, okay, we ran out of points. As you can see, in a defensive position, you are going to take time to deal your damage, so when your team kind of just folds like that, you're not going to be able to do too much. Udachi trying his best to help me out, but really, just the deficits of my teammates and the fact that we were not able to claim cap as a result does end that game rather prematurely. So you are going to get games like this in pretty much any ship, but you can see the Friesland does need time to develop her damage. You're not going to be dealing huge alpha strikes with this kind of vessel, right? So you are going to end up with games like this. So let's just hop back into the matchmaker, see if we can get one more, since that game was very quick. But that did demonstrate how, even though you're an extremely powerful, high utility destroyer, a radar cruiser is actually going to push you out of your cap in pretty much any situation, unless they're extremely low health. The 120mm guns don't really have the ability to pen most battleship armor directly, and even versus 25 and 27mm cruiser armor will shatter, so you're going to struggle to deal damage to anything other than cruiser superstructure, so it does take some time to kill cruisers. It's not that you can't deal damage to them, you're still quite effective versus cruisers, but it does take quite a while for you to get going, per se. Now in this next match, 2 brothers, 4 destroyers. I'm top tier again. I'm with a Haida, so the Haida has an excellent 5-7 detection for tier 7. So I'm going to let him scout for me. There's 4 destroyers, so a nice tier 2 split should be quite fair. Buffalo on my side as well. They have a Buffalo in Seattle and a Paulo Emilio to watch out for. Paulo Emilio, of course, has terrible detection, even worse than mine, but with that sap and my very large hull, you can definitely deal large sums of damage to me if I'm not careful. Now I'm pretty uniquely suited to dealing with him. I have both a smoke and a hydroacoustic, so you can feel free to push into me, and you can't spot me until 3 kilometers. If I'm firing, 2 kilometers if I'm not. but still something to keep in mind, especially since he is divisioned with a radar cruiser. Top tier again, so 7 to 9 once more. Alsace, Jean-Bar, Monarch, Nagado, Sinop, Buffalo, Seattle, Helena, and then Paulo, Mahon, Udachi, Bliskovica. Udachi is pretty close to me. I believe he still beats me. He's like 6'2", 6'3", or something. Mahon is a 6'7", if I recall, and Bliskovica is also a 6'8". So pretty favorable matchmaking because of the sheer number of tier 7s that have been thrown into this matchmaking. So I'm going to play the perimeter. So it would be nice to play on this island. That would be the ideal. But the problem is, if the Buffalo is on this flank and he goes right up to this island, he can actually radar me in that relatively safe position, and it's not a very pleasant situation to be caught in. So I'm actually going to go wide out into the open. I do have my long duration American smokes, and in a map like Two Brothers where there's lots of empty space and they're not necessarily going to push into you, this can be a superior position. So approaching kind of wide set, my Buffalo radaring quite early. Pretty ambitious. It would only catch someone on this corner at the very edge. The Mahon is coming in, so he's the second destroyer in to this cap zone. He's smoking, which is interesting. I'm contesting now. I see a Seattle on the other side. Don't see the Buffalo yet though, so I have to be very cautious. So there's the Paulo Emilio. Now remember, my ballistics aren't great. Okay, I don't know why I'm oh, it's because that guy left his smoke. So you can see I was briefly spotted, and then I became completely undetected. I popped my hydro. I meant to pop my smoke, honestly, but it didn't work out that way. But I'm gonna push this Mahon. Now I see the Alsace and the rest of the ship, so I'm actually gonna start smoking as I push. Remember, I have that 30-second duration. I don't really care if they all leave. The Alsace is my particular target. I have my hydro keeping me safe for 2 minutes, thanks to the hydroacoustic mod, and now I see the Buffalo. 10-7. So we're gonna dissuade this Buffalo. He's the key threat to me. Now I can't go too broadside. If I see a destroyer, I should switch to him immediately though. Oh, didn't land too many shells on the Alsace. You can see it's very easy to tunnel with this high rate of fire. Here's a quick fire for my high fire chance. Still safe for another 2 minutes in this smoke cloud. 45 seconds on my hydro. This Alsace is pushing, however, so that's interesting. He's still on fire. At this point, he's quite broadside, so I'm actually going to switch over to the AP and we'll show off a bit of the AP. He's turning out and away, so we're only going to get a couple salvos in. But I imagine we're going to do some nice chip damage. 300 there, 300 there, 300 per shell. And you can imagine how that quickly adds up. There's that Paulo Emilio. Definitely want to shave HP off of him. He doesn't have that saturation unlike French destroyers, so with almost 200,000 high explosive DPM, it's definitely going to shave some of his HP off. He is a beefy boy, however, so I'll survive for a bit. Oh, there's that Buffalo. I'm surprised he didn't radar me. He's inside radar range. I don't want to remind him, though, that I'm here until I'm ready to leave. So I'm turning out and away, ready to abandon my smoke if necessary. He's turning out and away. My smoke is fading in 20 seconds anyway, so not a huge loss. My allied destroyer that pushed, the Haida, pushed a little too aggressively against some fairly powerful ships, and I'm gonna drop a destroyer. So now I need to find cover. This is the most applicable piece of cover that I can find at the moment. They're not particularly pushing. I don't know why this Richelieu is pushing. He's definitely not supposed to be pushing here. You can see the enemy has quite a force. I would love to be shooting that Sinop. Even though he has that Russian damage control isn't going to stop you from burning. I'm going to use this control point island here, I think. He has done the Bismarck turn to disengage himself. I have my smoke screen up and available once more. My hydro, however, is not up for 25 seconds. I'm actually going to smoke here. Okay, this is going to be interesting. So he's well within my 3 kilometers smoke detectability. I'm going to switch to armor piercing because he's so thick. I believe Yolo Emilio does have 2 tubes per side. Okay, he does drop. And now I'm actually still in a fairly strong position. I was at the island when he hopped up. I'm gonna rain fire onto this Alsace first, before I start abusing Russian damage controls. You can see he has a fire, but he doesn't have a midsection fire, and the midsection fire is the easiest one to get. Okay, we lose sight of him. Unfortunately. So we did take a bit of chip damage. So I can't see anything, but I can blind fire this location. My rate of fire is such that very easy to correct if necessary. So if this guy really wants to contest a Friesland, he can feel free to try. So I'm just going to keep him continually on fire. Now I can't really damage him that much, as I mentioned. Just going to shatter everywhere, really. Doesn't have that much superstructure either. Okay, that's the Buffalo radar. I'm going to glide here behind this island. He's going to get his forward turrets into me. I'm going to repair immediately, don't want to risk losing a gun. Now only the Sinop can really damage me. I have 2 battleships behind me, which should technically keep him from attacking me too heavily. You can see the gun angles on the actual Friesland hull. Not fantastic. Relight that fire. Keep him nice and crispy. Alsace is pushing me, but I can just push along behind this island when necessary. My smoke is fading anyway, so I can't really go back into it. Alsace continuing to push. Getting ready. Gonna switch to AP. He's pretty broadside. You can see that destroyer in the distance. Small amounts of chip damage, but it's gonna add up quite quickly. His secondaries will engage me, but not too concerned. He's turning out and away. Switch back to HE. Let's see if we can get that stern fire. You can see battleship secondaries are not particularly scary. Stern fire is annoying, but I'm gonna fade into the darkness. Just continuing to pump out shells. You can see people pushing into me, in this case, allowing me to farm up a storm. This guy damage controlled quite recently, so if I eventually set a fire, then he's going to take quite a bit of damage. You can see me increasing the lead distance quite substantially. There's that fire. With 2 fires on him, that's fairly lethal. I'm going to switch over to this Monarch. Again, he's broadside, so AP. Synops decides to fire. Switch back to high explosive. Now remember, there's still a Mahan pretty close to me. So let's go for our fire first on the Monarch. It's just me and one other ship left, by the way. That's why they're recklessly pushing in. And now, with no torpedoes, I am actually in a pretty tricky spot. So this one's going to be a loss as well. You can see my team got decimated. Blind fire and torpedoes tells me that the Mahan is on the other side, along with that Monarch. I'm going to continue to rain shells onto the Synop. Still very powerful in this static position. Now obviously I can't. Okay, so there's a Mahan in front of me. Oh, there's a Buffalo in front of me. Just gonna bow in. Switch to AP at this point. Can't quite citadel him here. Aiming a little too far forward, perhaps. You can actually citadel a Des Moines at this range. I have done it before, but you can see, like, even though we got overrun and this team eventually folded, very, very powerful in that static position. It's just we ran out of backup and eventually the enemy was able to push me. But as long as I control the enemy and keep that island in the way, we were able to hold that position for an extended period of time and be quite powerful. So 131 this time, 483 shells. You'll see most of them are non-penetrations because of the nature of Friesland HE, but we got to make fair use out of the AP this time. Not for long enough that we were able to shred anything in particular. Just short bursts of AP, unfortunately, but I'm sure we'll see a pretty decent chunk of AP damage later. 2 incapacitations, 1 kill, 6 fires only, 10 defender ribbons, 1 solo capture, and 2 spotting ribbons. Team score-wise, well, as you can see, my team struggled a fair bit with actually playing the game, but it's a weekend, so this is to be expected. Detailed report-wise, you can see proportionately we dealt a pretty good chunk of damage with AP 28,000 from just 103 shells. Ships like even that Paulo Emilio will take a fair bit of AP damage. You can see that 6.8k there, and on the Buffalo that 10k at the very end in our kind of act of desperation. Still, the bulk of your damage will be HE and fires, but yeah, not too much to say there. This game was a complete blowout, but still able to acquit ourselves quite nicely by occupying a forward but defensive position. And that's pretty much the reason in a nutshell. Very powerful defensive ship, and plays a little bit more like a cruiser than anything else. Not too much has changed for her in the Captain rework. She did lose some reload, but in exchange she is more readily able to take Superintendent now. And, well, she remains a powerful ship. Not too much to say. Definitely, with the removal of the Alaska from the free experience shop, she's my pick for which one of the 1 million free experience tier 9s to take. So, definitely a keeper, and if you're a cruiser player, very pleasant experience if you like playing light cruisers. Plays very akin to kind of like a very tiny Smolensk in some ways, or even just a Worcester Colbert. Anyhow, 3 games, so I won't take too much more of your time. Some pretty wide variance in our experiences overall. Sad to end off on a 1-2 win-loss, but it is what it is. That's World of Warships in the modern day. I hope you enjoyed, and I will catch you all later. Cheers.